Good morning, everyone. I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person today. I'm speaking to you today from a Awabakal country, and I understand you're gathered on Warramai and Biripi country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, and we show our respect for elders, past, present, and emerging. We at DeepI seek to work through thoughtful and collaborative approaches, seeking to demonstrate our ongoing commitment to providing places in which Aboriginal people are included socially, culturally, and economically. I also wanted to reflect from a personal view on the very large process at work when we talk about climate change, putting in context just how long Aboriginal people have lived and adapted to conditions in this part of the world. The last 10,000 years of Earth's climatic history, during which our agricultural, social, economic and political systems have evolved, have been remarkably stable from a climatic point of view. For most of this time, our climate has not varied more than half a degree above or below the sort of 1961 to 1990 average that we use as a bit of a base, and looking at future climate change. So that point of time has been really stable, and I'll show a slide showing that a bit later. And it's worth thinking about how much of our current day civilization relies on knowledge, technology, and experience developed within that time for those conditions. Aboriginal culture, of course, has developed over a much longer period of occupation of this region. We know that prior to the last 10,000 years, they experienced much colder conditions, up to 4 degrees cooler than current day, and multiple significant changes in sea levels on the coast. How did they adapt to such large changes? The answer is in a very rich culture that embodies its relationships to land and sea in a way that we who came here from over the seas have moved a long way from. My name is John de Bruyn, and I work as part of a branch in the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment called Climate Resilience and Net Zero Emissions. I'm the Climate Preparedness Project Officer based in Newcastle. I primarily work on in the Hunter and Central Coast regions, but also share the New England Northwest with my colleague Malcolm Robertson, who's based in Coffs Harbour, and he covers the North Coast down to about Port Macquarie and Hastings LGA. One thing to acknowledge early, of course, is that I'm aware that the Mid Coast region has in the past been considered part of that North Coast region, and it's not in fact geographically part of the Hunter. So I'll just say straight away that any ambiguities and errors in the way I or my team refers to your regions is just bureaucratic, and I apologise for any inconvenience. I also work on statewide projects. I liaise with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, Agriculture, team who are colleagues who have an adaptation team as well, and that's really interesting work. I work with Resilience New South Wales. You may know them still as OEM, Office of Emergency Management. I've got colleagues there working on emergency and disaster management programs, and we talk to them regularly. I also talk to local land services and other regional stakeholders and programs, and really we work regionally and statewide. And I hope that you can be in contact with me. My contact details are there if you have any questions or opportunities that you'd like to explore. So today I've been asked to speak to you a bit about climate change in the Mid Coast to Tops region, where most of you, I believe, are based. I will be talking more generally about the Hunter and Central Coast area, but I will try and zoom in a bit to the Mid Coast particularly. The way I'm framing this talk is really to sort of ask, how can communities know, assess and respond to climate change in the Hunter and Central Coast? And really, I'm going to probably focus on the know and the assess part. I think the respond part is something you'll be covering today in more detail, so I won't try and touch on that, but I think I can tell you about the know. What do we know? And tell you how we as government are working to assess that, and then help you, of course, respond. So there's plenty to cover. I'll jump right in. So what do we need to know? I'll touch a bit on what we know as government and the data sets that we come from. And then, as I said, we'll move on to assess, and I think respond is where you're going to be looking at in detail later today. So this is, for me, where it begins. Our relationship with the sun, energy, heat, is all really managed through the water cycle. It's the sun that drives that water cycle, but it's the water cycle effectively that goes around and through our systems, through all our natural and our physical systems. And the sort of combination of all of that is really what we're talking about today. We're talking about weather. And climate is weather. Whether it's the extremes of frost, flood, dust storm, drought, cyclone, hail, lightning, thunder, perfectly clear day, or overcast, these are the things that land managers need to be aware of. And so knowing that, of course, we map the weather so that we can predict it. We know that it's seasonal. We account for it in our planning ahead. Of course, it's not exactly the same as European winters that have set the template for a lot of our agriculture, but nonetheless, it is seasonal. And it's geographic. We know where generally, within this diverse continent, various climates should be found, and how we can manage our agriculture and our land management systems to accommodate those climates. And of course, it's changing. You may recall this was the January 2013 when the Bureau of Meteorology had to create a new colour to account for the hot conditions of over 50 degrees or thereabouts in Central Australia. And this is the graph I was referring to before. So yes, climate changes on Earth, or has changed historically on Earth. And yes, there have been some wild fluctuations, but the last 10,000 years, this period in which we have set the way in which we dwell on Earth, the way we've gotten used to agriculture, the way we've gotten and developed our food systems, and even our transport systems, our technologies, our lifestyles, our building methods, all these things have really been set over the last, say, 10,000 years, when there has been a huge amount of stability, a huge amount of predictability. And it's the time before that that really you had this much colder period, and the time before that again where you had warm spikes. So when we talk about climate change and people say, but it's always been changing, of course the answer is yes, but you need to know how much it has changed and when that change took place, and how much our current ways of working, of being, of managing our land and our lives can accommodate change that is expected. So this is slightly old, and 2013 is no longer Australia's hottest year on record. In fact, 2019 was. But this was put out by the Bureau of Meteorology back just after 2013, really to sort of show how the anomalies, these temperature anomalies, and this is that sort of 2060 to 2090 baseline that's sort of used as a bit of a baseline. But you can see over that year, 2013, we had huge temperature anomalies above that line and only a few temperature anomalies below. Here you can see 2013 on a map. There's our zero line, the 1960 through to 1990 base. Of course, it was rising before that as well. That just happens to be a useful little base to work from because it's in recent memory. So it had already been rising. That's not the zero through the last 10,000 years. That's the zero just in our lives that we can talk to. So temperature's been rising, and these orange lines are the computer simulations of how it will rise. There are multiple simulations in there, so there's a whole lot of variation, and you can see generally they sit above, sort of within a general band. The white tracking, this is for Australia by the way, the white tracking is the observed temperatures. So this is what we've observed, and you can see it pretty much sits within, almost in the center often, of that predicted computer simulation. And I've added on as well from 2013 to 2019. We're still within that. So that 2019 we had a few years of not hitting any peaks, and then 2019 we hit a peak again. And here you can see the years and their temperature anomalies, the average mean temperature anomaly from 1910 through to 2019. There's 2013 there, hottest year on record at that time. Here's 2019 here, broke that record. So the zero line again, just to explain that more fully, you can see sort of through 1960 through to about 1990, the average of that period was around about zero, and you can see there's sort of the spread of anomalies up and down around that time is about half and half, and that's how that is given. Before that, it was slightly cooler, and after that, now it's warmer, and we are rising now into the sort of 1.5 degree warmer than what we might expect in our recent history. So our sort of parents, our grandparents, that generation were experiencing these temperatures. We are now experiencing 1.5 temperatures above. Of course, they were also experiencing a good half degree above what was historically set. But I think now is the time we're really starting to understand this and actually starting to track it. Most of the climate data that you'll need is on the Adapt New South Wales website. I encourage you all to go there. The web address is on the bottom right of the screen. There's regional information, New South Wales wide information. There are snapshots and the various publications, and that actually is being worked on constantly. The NARCLIM data information that underpins all this is actually undergoing quite a lot of work at the moment. There's an interface that you can use to actually zoom in to specific regions. So that sort of regional definition that I was mentioning before, the North Coast Hunter thing doesn't sort of matter when you zoom in to your specific location. You can actually find some fine-grained data there. So I encourage you to do that and get to know it. Again, it is changing and should be made better. But the data and the data really, I mean, while it's being redone, which as it should, and the scientists are working on this all the time, really the trends that we know are just being reinforced. And of course, the main one there is heat. Some of the other ones, I mean, rainfall, I think you may well be aware, is fairly unpredictable or is hard to be sure that what we are predicting is correct. There are some wet models showing wet futures. There are drier ones. Unfortunately, the thing we're saddled with when it comes down to rainfall is uncertainty. So we've got snapshots available, and these are regional. There's the North Coast, the Hunter, and the Central Coast snapshots. So they're all relevant to me in my area. And your region was probably going to be in the North Coast snapshot, the southern part of that North Coast snapshot, which, like I say, and we've got these snapshots which actually go into specifics of effects of impacts. Soil is going to be impacted. Soil erosion will be impacted. Hydrology, East Coast lows. There's some quite interesting information there on East Coast lows, and of course they pack quite a punch. Urban heat is something we're needing to deal with. I don't think that's something you'll be looking at today necessarily, but heat waves certainly, and there are those regional snapshots. The NARCLIM data that you might have heard or hear me talk about is the data modeling, the climate information modeling that we use, and it's been done a little while ago. It was done, and they did it for pretty much two simulation periods is really the takeaway here. The near future and the far future. So the near future is considered to be the time frame 2020 through to 2039. So really now onwards, and there's a far future scenario of 2060 through to 2070. So sometimes the near future might be called sort of 2030, and the far future might be called 2070. Of course, they're not they can't be exact models of those years or anything like it. And in actual fact, we're finding that those, if anything, those time periods that we're expecting are sort of closer. So we are almost, you could start considering us to be solidly within the near future scenarios and heading towards the far future scenarios. But if you are looking for detail, I would suggest you dig deeper than just that, and also keep an eye out for the revised data that will be coming, and will be turned again into those snapshots and other digestible information. They've been working on that this year, and they'll be releasing more and more of that data next year. So climate change in the Hunter and Central Coast. Well, what do we know? We know that we'll be expecting increasing temperatures, about an average of 2 degrees increase through the region. The darker red being the slightly higher increases, and the lighter not so light, but there's going to be temperature increase. Most sort of impactful of that will be the increasing number of hot days. So days over 35 is a threshold that we use to count hot days, and there'll be a good 10 to 20 more of those per annum. And we've experienced those in those warm years, 2013, 2019. We've felt that. Those are hot years. Those are the years in which we get this increasing number of hot days. And those hot days can have serious impacts on health of people, but also, of course, ecosystems as well. And then they turn into fire weather, which is there at the bottom of the list. So decreasing number of cold nights. I'll talk a bit about that in a sec as well. And rainfall, well, like I said, the real takeaway there is unpredictability, but the trends or the predictions are for there to be increasing rainfall in autumn and some increasing rainfall in summer at the coast, and decreasing rainfall in winter and spring. Okay, I won't dwell on this too long, but fire weather is expected to increase, and we've already felt the impacts of that having increased in the last summer. This is the prediction for spring of 2070, and there's a significant increase in number of forest fire danger index days. What's happened for fire, as I think you've heard probably discussed in the media, and it certainly plays out in the research that we work with as well, is that the increased heat, the lack of water, the lack of rainfall, the drying out of the soil, the drying out of the vegetation, all come together at the point of a heat wave and cause catastrophic damage. And that is what's been played out, and these are some of, I probably haven't described it perfectly, but these are the things that contribute to the forest fire danger index. So that work obviously is ongoing, and we will continue to work on that and bring that to you. But years like 2013, 2019 last year, and of course the summer of 2019-20, have something that's really changed. I think the understanding of what climate change is and what the impacts of climate change are. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at rainfall. And this is a map showing the predicted changes in rainfall for the far future. And you can see there's not only some patches of increased rainfall, some patches of decreased rainfall. But if you look on the left-hand side, you actually see there's quite a bit of uncertainty in the modelling themselves. Those bands, those above and below the dotted line, are really the uncertainty, the range of modelling. So the modelling that's sometimes used, not in these snapshots, but sometimes is used as we sort of talk about hot and dry futures, or cooler and wetter futures. Of course, we are now going into a wet period. We've just been through a dry period. So we've got these trends already in our climate systems, in our weather systems, and now we're trying to predict those as best we can. Unfortunately, the best I can do really about rainfall is just tell you that it's going to be increasingly variable. So just a reminder, this is I'm looking off the North Coast climate change snapshot. So a lot of the information I'm presenting comes from that one particularly. So if you're looking for the easy to digest piece of information from the Adapt website, it'll be from the North Coast climate change snapshot. And you'll be looking at the southern part of that around the Taree area. Okay, let's look at cold nights. Now, cold nights can be talked about as frost nights or potential frost nights. And I know they're important for agriculture, particularly horticulture, and maybe important to you in various other land management aspects. So I'm not an expert on that, and I hope maybe you learn a bit about that today. What I can tell you is that the predictions are for the number of cold nights to decrease. And in the near future, being the sort of now 2020 to 2030 mark, we're expecting them to, in general, decrease a good sort of 5 or 10 cold nights per year. That's about half, really, about half what we experience now. The far future, even slightly more than that, up around the 10 and even up to 20 less cold nights per year than we have. And again, that's about half of what we have. And looking at this map here from the Bureau of Meteorology, you can see those numbers that are the patterns that we're used to, which is sort of between 0 and 10 at the coast, and then rising up through sort of 10, 30, and 40, 50 as you go inland and up into the higher altitudes. So those are the base numbers that we're comparing the previous data with. And there you can see that the numbers of cold nights, if they're dropping by those numbers, that is quite significant for horticulture and land management. Heat waves. Now, heat waves we are experiencing already. There's expected to be a good, well, on average, one more per year in the near future, and I think by my reckoning, we're pretty much experiencing that. So we are experiencing heat waves. That's we had a few of them last summer, and in the years previous to that as well. In 2013 being the other memorable year. And what we're expecting in the far future is for there to be a significant increase in number of heat waves compared to that sort of baseline 2060, 2090, 1960, 1990 baseline. And there'll be a good 2 or 3 more heat waves than normal. So how do we, now that we know a little bit about climate change and its impacts, how do we assess the risks, look at the regional vulnerabilities, and find opportunities for change, for opportunities to reduce emissions, and the priorities of making all those choices? Well, last year the government looked at the Hunter and Central Coast regions together, talked to government employees at the sort of the front end of dealing with climate change, and we mapped a series, the sort of spaghetti diagram really of climate change impacts and consequences. So these are the major climate change impact areas: sea level rise, drought, flooding, east coast lows and storms, and heat and heat waves. And then looked more closely at what the climate drivers were, and also with the non-climate drivers, what the adaptive capacity is. That's the green box there in the middle. So the adaptive capacity really shows where the region can change, how it can transform. So by finding the potential impacts, the adaptive capacity, the vulnerability, we looked for key systems and transition pathways, and how to actually transform from a sort of business as usual scenario through to a change scenario in 2050. And we came up with a series of transition models, and these are available now on a website, on the Adapt New South Wales website. There's a Hunter and Central Coast page there, and I welcome you all to go and have a look and see what we've worked through there. But just to look at a couple So this is the industry transformation model, and you'll see at the top there, it shows leadership and governance within Hunter Central Coast for Hunter Central Coast. Sustainable community initiatives supported by all levels of government for a just transition. And I think that's what this presentation today is, as a part of some grant funding that we had with the IRCC grant package program. And the government is supporting this transition. So I think that's worth noting. We are supporting that and we want to be part of that with you. This is the protection of natural systems and environment transformation system. And I think the point is so often made so clearly that really natural systems and biodiversity underpin so much of what we rely on. So this one's really important. I'm only mentioning a few of these, but the last one I'll show is the water and water security one, which again, hugely important to get right, hugely important for life and sustaining life and being resilient. So we work with Hunter Water on these. We worked with, as I've mentioned, a few other agencies like Local Land Services, Department of Primary Industries, and that'll continue. And we will be looking at these. These are only just freshly published now, so I'm just giving you a bit of a sneak peek. And then, of course, we get to how to respond. So we've looked at the impacts, the trends. We know the regional snapshots are there. We can find the local climate projections and we can talk about likely scenarios, likely futures. We are working through risk assessments. There's certainly other bodies have done risk assessments as well. The Hunter Joint Organisation, I urge you to point to their work. I've recently just finished this vulnerability and pathways analysis for transitions last year. We're starting to work through the priorities. Of course, different people have different priorities, and there are multiple opportunities to reduce emissions, and I think that area is certainly getting very exciting. The question you now have before you is, how do you respond and adapt to climate change, and also include with, part of the context is, of course, that transition to a low carbon future. So that's not my role today to talk about that, but I hope what I've given you is something of the first two, and I hope that you'll enjoy the rest of the day and learn much. I'm really sorry I can't be there today myself. I'm sure I would learn heaps from the speakers that are coming up, but I do urge you to get back in touch with me if you would like to find out more, if I can help. Thank you so much for having me today. I will happily hand you back to whoever started this video. I hope it worked. I hope you found it informative, and I hope it's laid a bit of groundwork for what should be a very, very interesting day. Thank you very much.